What Emma Raducanu just said about Carlos Alcaraz has sent a shockwave through the tennis world. Fans weren't expecting it. Analysts weren't expecting it. And Alcaraz himself certainly wasn't expecting his former mixed doubles partner to take such a strong, public stance against him. In a sport where most players avoid controversy, Raducanu has chosen the opposite path, and her words have opened a debate that reaches far beyond scheduling, tournaments, or obligations. They touch the core of what it means to survive the modern ATP calendar. And the contrast between her view and Alcaraz's reveals something deeper about pressure, personality, and ambition. Raducanu didn't hesitate when she was asked about the overloaded tennis calendar. She didn't try to soften her answer, and she didn't speak in generalities. Instead, she went straight for the heart of the topic and said, "I don't think it's something to complain about because it's what gives us our living." It was direct, sharp, and unmistakable. And because these words came only weeks after Alcaraz publicly criticized the heavy schedule, the world immediately connected the dots. Raducanu wasn't just making an observation, she was responding. For Alcaraz, the calendar has become a growing concern. He has openly complained about the number of mandatory tournaments, the difficulty of finding time to train, and the mental toll that comes with constant travel. He even suggested he might skip mandatory events in the future just to protect his physical and mental condition. Coming from the world number one, those comments carried enormous weight. They weren't excuses. They were warnings about the sustainability of the modern tour. But Raducanu's message was different. Brutally different. She pointed out that tennis players, despite the pressure, live extremely privileged lives. She compared the struggle to that of everyday workers who don't get to choose when they rest. She said there are people whose bosses force them to do things and they still have to show up, because it's their job. And though she didn't mention Alcaraz by name, the timing made the message unmistakable. Her stance created immediate tension across social media. Fans defending her argued that Alcaraz plays a massive number of matches, exhibitions, appearances, and media commitments. Far more than Raducanu herself plays. They said the comparison wasn't fair. Others argued that she was saying what many players think privately. The ATP calendar is tough, but it comes with extraordinary rewards. And this friction revealed something important about the new generation. They are not unified. They see pressure differently. They cope with responsibility differently. And their relationship with the sport varies dramatically. What makes this moment so fascinating is that Alcaraz didn't respond with anger or defensiveness. He acknowledged that fans often misunderstand the difference between tournaments and exhibitions. He explained calmly that an exhibition match requires only 1 day of focus, while a tournament demands 10 days of peak physical and mental commitment. In other words, exhibitions don't drain him, tournaments do. And those tournaments, with their expanding length and growing obligations, are becoming harder to survive. This debate comes at a crucial moment in his career. Alcaraz is preparing for the 2026 season with one objective above everything else: the Australian Open, the only Grand Slam missing from his resume. To sharpen himself, he scheduled multiple exhibition matches in December and January, including a highly anticipated event in Seoul against Sinner. Critics say he can't complain about workload and still accept exhibitions. But Alcaraz insists these matches help him find rhythm, confidence, and physical readiness before a demanding season. He then made a comment that changed the tone entirely. He said he believes he will beat Sinner in their next match after making specific changes in training. That phrase, simple but powerful, created a wave of anticipation across the ATP world. Because when Alcaraz says he's making changes, it means he's preparing for an evolution. And every evolution of Alcaraz makes the rivalry with Sinner even more unpredictable. Meanwhile, his life off the court has become just as visible. From NBA games in Miami to walking onto the pitch with Messi and Inter Miami, Alcaraz's presence has become magnetic. Wherever he goes, cameras follow. And yet, behind that visible joy, there is a player who is still trying to manage pressure, expectations, scheduling, obligations, and the weight of becoming world number one. A player who still remembers the advice Rafa Nadal once gave him: never treat tennis as an obligation, treat it as something you enjoy. But the world number one ranking is unforgiving. The ATP recently punished both Alcaraz and Sinner for missing mandatory Masters 1000 events. Alcaraz lost half of his bonus, nearly $5 million, because he couldn't play all the tournaments required. It wasn't because he lacked passion. It was because his body needed rest. And that's the irony at the core of this story. Raducanu might see tennis as a job with obligations, but Alcaraz is living the consequences of treating it that way. He is now forced to balance ambition with survival. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to World News Tennis, the only channel that tells you what's really happening behind Alcaraz, Sinner, and the future of the ATP Tour. When the debate around Emma Raducanu's comments grew louder, something unexpected happened. People stopped looking at her words as a simple criticism and began seeing them as a window into the different mindsets shaping the next era of tennis. Because Raducanu wasn't just talking about schedules or obligations. She was revealing a philosophy, a belief that tennis players, despite the intensity of the sport, must accept the demands placed on them and find strength in discipline rather than comfort. And that belief stands in sharp contrast with Carlos Alcaraz's more personal, introspective approach to managing pressure. Behind closed doors, those who know Alcaraz well say he isn't bothered by Raducanu's comments. He sees them as part of the conversation, part of the evolving dialogue among players trying to survive a season that now stretches almost all year long. But privately, he is wrestling with something much larger than criticism. He's wrestling with the growing weight of expectation. From fans, from his team, from the ATP, from himself. Because once you become world number one, the calendar stops feeling like a schedule and starts feeling like a storm. What makes the tension even more powerful is the timeline. Raducanu expressed her view at a moment when Alcaraz was openly admitting that he needed to think about skipping mandatory tournaments just to protect his health. This wasn't weakness. It was honesty. A rare kind of honesty that elite athletes often avoid. And yet that honesty triggered backlash from people who believe champions should always push through. But pushing through is exactly what Alcaraz has done for the last 3 years, and the cost of that is only now becoming visible. During his media appearances in Miami, he answered questions with the same calmness he shows on court. But when asked about the calendar again, he said something telling, "People see us playing and think that's everything. They don't see the other months when we have to stay focused, stay in shape, stay ready for every tournament." He wasn't complaining. He was explaining the reality of a tennis life that almost never stops. A life where rest becomes a luxury, not a guarantee. At the same time, Raducanu was making the opposite argument, that tennis players live better than most and must adapt to whatever the schedule demands. She talked about everyday workers, office jobs, obligations that don't allow flexibility. Her message was that tennis, despite its pressure, offers opportunity and rewards that justify the commitments. But her critics pointed out something important. Raducanu plays significantly fewer tournaments than Alcaraz. She doesn't live the same rhythm. She doesn't carry the same load. And that difference adds a layer of complexity to her remarks. Still, the contrast between them is fascinating, because it reflects two psychological profiles. Alcaraz feels everything: pressure, expectation, physical fatigue, emotional highs, emotional lows. His tennis is expressive because his personality is expressive. Raducanu, meanwhile, approaches the sport with a colder logic. She sees competition as duty, responsibility, structure. Neither is wrong. But their collision creates a storyline that goes far beyond a single interview. And while the conversation around them intensified, Alcaraz continued preparing for the upcoming season in his own way. He scheduled exhibitions not for money, but to test his body. He trained in Miami while also trying to enjoy moments away from the court: NBA games, football matches, time with Messi, time to breathe. Because for him, balance isn't a luxury. It's survival. Without balance, his explosiveness fades, and his joy disappears. And when his joy disappears, his tennis suffers. But even during those light-hearted appearances in Miami, there were signs of the pressure he carries. Cameras captured moments when he looked thoughtful, even distant, as if running calculations in his mind. Not about games, but about the long season ahead. The physical battle. The expectations. The rivalry with Sinner waiting to ignite again. The Australian Open he desperately wants to win. The ranking he wants to defend. And Paul Annacone, one of the most respected coaches in tennis, said privately that what separates Alcaraz from others is that he feels responsibility in his bones. Raducanu doesn't feel that same weight. Her relationship with the sport is different, shaped by inconsistency, injuries, moments of brilliance, and long periods away from competition. She has never experienced a 60-match season. She has never defended a #1 ranking. She has never spent months moving from continent to continent with no break. And that is why some fans felt her critique lacked perspective. She was speaking from the outside of the storm, while Alcaraz is in the center of it. Yet the irony is that her words touched a nerve precisely because they weren't entirely wrong. The tennis calendar is a job. There are obligations. There are responsibilities. And many former champions believe the new generation doesn't always respect that structure. Raducanu voiced what many think but never say out loud. Tennis is hard, but it's still a privilege. And Alcaraz, in a way, agreed with her, but from a different angle. He said exhibitions give him rhythm, confidence, and a chance to feel ready for the season. He said mandatory tournaments require 10 days of full emotional investment, something people underestimate. He never argued that players shouldn't work. He argued that the workload isn't just physical, it's psychological. As he began the final stretch of training before flying to Australia, he said something that revealed exactly where his mind was. If I don't manage myself correctly, I won't be ready for the moments that matter. And those moments, the big finals, the battles with Sinner, the pressure of number one, are exactly where his legacy will be built. The debate with Raducanu isn't personal. It's symbolic. It's two visions of tennis colliding at the center of the sport. And their difference exposes a deeper truth. Surviving the calendar is not just about working hard. It's about understanding who you are and who you want to become. As the discussion around Emma Raducanu's comments continued, something unexpected began to unfold. It forced people to look at Carlos Alcaraz not just as a world number one, not just as a prodigy, but as a young athlete navigating one of the most demanding eras the sport has ever seen. The contrast between Raducanu's disciplined, almost detached approach and Alcaraz's emotional, high-energy style revealed something essential about the pressure facing today's champions. And that contrast became even clearer as the days passed. While Raducanu framed tennis as a structured job with obligations, Alcaraz lives the sport as something deeper, a passion that demands everything from him. He doesn't just compete, he immerses himself. And that immersion comes with a cost people often overlook. Those close to him say that even when he looks relaxed in public, his mind is constantly processing the next step, the next challenge, the next opportunity to improve. That's why his comments about needing rest weren't complaints. They were warnings about sustainability. But the moment Raducanu's interview gained traction, analysts began asking another question. Is the ATP schedule built for players like Alcaraz, who rely on intensity, explosiveness, and emotional investment? Or is it better suited for structured, methodical players who treat tennis like a fixed routine? The more people debated this, the more it became clear that Alcaraz is carrying a burden that very few understand. The burden of being expected to perform like a superstar every single week. And yet, while the debate raged, Alcaraz continued working quietly behind the scenes. He went through his training blocks in Miami with a new focus, a new intensity, almost as if he wanted to absorb every detail before the season began. His team noticed a difference too. He was more thoughtful in training, more calculated, more aware of his body. For the first time, he was beginning to see rest as part of the strategy, not a weakness. That shift wasn't about Raducanu. It was about survival. Still, her words lingered in the background of every conversation. Not because she attacked him, she didn't mention him directly, but because she sparked something deeper. A discussion about privilege, work ethic, and what it truly means to endure the modern game. When she compared tennis players to everyday workers with rigid obligations, many felt it oversimplified the reality. Others argued she was simply telling the truth. But what made her comments resonate was the timing. They arrived when Alcaraz was openly questioning how to balance ambition and longevity. Meanwhile, he continued preparing for his exhibitions. He knew fans were criticizing him for playing them. He knew some people saw contradictions. But for him, these matches were not about money or promotion. They were about rhythm, confidence, and readiness, the exact ingredients he needs before entering Melbourne with the weight of an entire nation behind him. And deep inside, he knows the Australian Open is not just another tournament. It's the missing piece of his legacy. When he spoke with Tennis Korea about his exhibition against Sinner, he said something that revealed how much he thinks about their rivalry. We've strengthened each other. That one sentence carried an entire story inside it. A story of finals, battles, heartbreaks, triumphs, and the psychological chess match that defines the modern ATP era. Sinner pushes him. He pushes Sinner. And in that cycle, both players evolve faster than the sport itself. But the pressure that comes with that evolution is immense. And this is where Raducanu's comments unintentionally touched the core of the issue. For players like her, who play fewer tournaments and are still trying to stabilize their careers, the calendar feels manageable. For a world number one like Alcaraz, the calendar is a marathon with no finish line, a relentless sequence of obligations, expectations, and emotional demands. He's not just playing matches, he's defending a legacy that people already expect him to build. And yet, within all of this, something remarkable happened. After weeks of discussion, criticism, and debate, Alcaraz made a statement that silenced everything. He said he believes he will beat Sinner in their next match thanks to changes he has made in training. That single sentence shifted the entire narrative. It replaced controversy with anticipation. It replaced doubt with confidence. It replaced external noise with internal clarity. Because the truth is, Alcaraz isn't fighting Raducanu's perspective. He's fighting the expectations that come with greatness. He's fighting the weight of being compared to Nadal, Djokovic, and Federer before he's even finished building the first chapter of his career. And he's fighting the invisible pressure that comes from being the center of attention in every country he visits, every match he plays, every interview he gives. The difference between him and Raducanu is not about who is right. It's about who is living inside the storm and who is watching from the outside. She offered a viewpoint. He is living the experience. And that difference matters. Now, as the season approaches, the world is watching Alcaraz more closely than ever. His exhibitions will be analyzed. His training will be measured. His first steps in Australia will be scrutinized. And through it all, the words of Nadal echo in his mind: don't treat tennis as an obligation, enjoy it. Because if he cannot enjoy it, he cannot carry the pressure. And if he cannot carry the pressure, he cannot win the moments that will define his legacy. As the final days before the new season approached, the contrast between Emma Raducanu's cold, structured view of the tennis world and Carlos Alcaraz's emotionally charged journey became even clearer. It wasn't just a difference in opinion anymore. It was a difference in identity. A difference in how two young stars see their careers, their responsibilities, and the weight placed on their shoulders. And that difference revealed the deeper truth behind this entire debate. Not all pressure is the same, and not all players carry it the same way. While Raducanu framed tennis as a job with obligations, Alcaraz treated it as a mission. For him, every decision, every tournament, every exhibition, every training session, is part of a larger map. A map that leads to something he hasn't reached yet, a place among the legends. And that map requires sacrifice, not in the sense of suffering, but in the discipline of choosing what truly matters. That's why his comments about rest were not signs of weakness. They were signs of awareness. Awareness that his career will not be defined by a single season, but by how long he can maintain this level without breaking. Behind closed doors, his team spoke often about Raducanu's remarks. Not with anger but with curiosity. They understood that her experience is different, her perspective shaped by instability, injuries, and moments of intense scrutiny. But Alcaraz's life is built on consistency, momentum, and the relentless expectation to deliver. He doesn't play a few tournaments a year. He plays almost everything. He doesn't avoid pressure. He breathes inside it. And it's that environment, constant, heavy, demanding, that makes his relationship with the calendar different from anyone else's. But the irony is that Raducanu's words still served a purpose for him. They forced him to reflect on what weighs him down and what lifts him up. They made him confront the part of himself that sometimes feels overwhelmed by obligation. And they reminded him of Nadal's advice, not to treat tennis as something he must do, but as something he chooses to do. That distinction might seem small, but for a player whose life moves at the speed of expectation, it changes everything. Meanwhile, the world watched closely as he prepared for the Australian Open. Footage from practices in Miami showed a more calculated version of Alcaraz. Not less explosive, not less joyful, but more measured, more aware of how to conserve energy, when to push, when to hold back. His coaches noticed the difference immediately. They saw a player who wasn't trying to do everything at once anymore, but who was making space for longevity. Because greatness isn't built on intensity alone. It's built on intention. And intention is exactly what guided him when he made the bold declaration that he would beat Sinner in their next match. It wasn't arrogance. It was clarity. A way of saying, I know what I need to change, and I am changing it. It was the first glimpse of a new chapter in his rivalry with Sinner, a chapter built not on reaction, but on evolution. A chapter where the pressure stops being something that bends him and becomes something that shapes him. This version of Alcaraz, the one emerging quietly in the shadows of Miami practice courts, understands that he cannot live up to expectations by rushing. He must build slowly, deliberately, professionally. And part of that process is accepting that not everyone will understand his struggle. Not fans. Not commentators. Not even other players. Some, like Raducanu, will see tennis as a job. Others will see it as privilege. But for Alcaraz, it is neither. It is purpose. That purpose becomes clearer every time he speaks about Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic. When he says he believes he can sit at their table one day, he isn't bragging. He's acknowledging the mountain he's climbing, a mountain that cannot be scaled on talent alone. It requires resilience. It requires humility. And it requires the ability to adapt, even when the world expects perfection. As the season approaches, Alcaraz stands at the intersection of expectation and evolution. Raducanu's remarks may have sparked controversy, but they also highlighted the unique weight he carries. He isn't just playing tournaments. He's trying to shape a legacy. He's trying to balance joy with responsibility, pressure with peace, ambition with sustainability. And that conflict, internal, emotional, deeply human, is what makes him one of the most compelling athletes of his generation. What happens next won't be defined by a calendar dispute or a comment in an interview. It will be defined by how Alcaraz enters the court in Melbourne. How he handles the noise. How he handles the silence. How he handles the rivalry that now defines his career. And whether he can transform pressure into purpose. Because if he can, then Raducanu's comments will become just another chapter in a much larger story. The story of a young champion learning how to carry the weight of greatness. If you love this rivalry as much as we do, hit subscribe right now to World News Tennis. Don't miss the truth, the analysis, and the future of Alcaraz versus Sinner, the greatest rivalry of this generation.